Hey everybody, I'm Jay Scherr with Jay Scherr Business Consulting. We help entrepreneurs, business owners, and other leaders maximize their potential, build rock-solid foundations for their businesses, and create more freedom in their lives. And you've joined Business Minds Coffee Chat. Lao Tzu is attributed to the quote, "All streams flow to the sea because it is lower than they are. Humility gives it its power." Well, on today's episode, we're going to talk about radical humility, how you can be a badass leader and a good human. Sounds like a dichotomy, right? The 5 shifts that will help you elevate your leadership, why now is the time for humble leadership, and more. My guest is a proud father of 2 who are his ultimate joy, a former UN military peacekeeper and NATO military peacekeeping commander, a highly accomplished ultra-endurance champion who suffered a near-death experience while competing in the 2005 race across America. He's a seasoned leadership expert, best-selling author, internationally renowned keynote speaker, and a widely published professor. He's helped hundreds of leaders and dozens of executive teams unlock new levels of achievement across 4 continents. His message of radical humility in leadership has inspired teams at Amazon, Starbucks, Microsoft, and many other organizations. Please welcome the founder of the Radical Humility Leadership Institute and the man who's giving us the ultimate actionable blueprint for a new type of leader for a new type of world, Urs Koenig. Urs, it is so great to see you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Jay, for having me. It's a great privilege and honor. Love it.
Absolutely. I am so excited about our conversation today, and I've got to share with you, just researching you, listening to some of your talks, listening to other podcasts that you've been on, and of course, reading your new book, Radical Humility, it's been an eye-opener, and it has really been insightful for me, and I just love the topic. I love the way you deliver the message, the way that you show up to the world. So I know this is going to be such an incredible conversation for our audience. So let's dive right in. I thought a good starting point for us would be just a simple question. How would you like to be remembered?
Wow, that's a big question, Jay. So I'd love to be remembered as somebody who didn't take himself too seriously, and yet at the same time really worked hard at making a difference in the world through helping those around me and, people who are most dear to my heart, my family members, my community, my friends, and my clients to, on their own, make a little small contribution towards a better world. So, the combo, I'm already sort of, alluring to the book, I guess, of not take myself too seriously, but at the same time, really worked hard at making a difference.
Such a great response. I really like that one. So along some similar lines, what is your favorite thing about yourself and why that particular thing?
Oh my God, you're asking the guy who wrote the book on radical humility. And now the favorite thing about myself, I talk in the book about a shift of being tough on results and tender on people. And that is so near and dear to my heart. And that actually is one of the things which I think I really bring to the world. And so I love people. And we can talk about this, I feel you have to love people if you want to be a good leader. Doesn't mean you have to be an extrovert, but you fundamentally have to love people. And I love people. And I also love results. So I'm constantly refining it and working on it, but I think I'm pretty good at holding that balance, at sort of, walking that line between the two.
Beautifully said. And I would agree with you, right? We have to love on our people. And in any type of leadership role, we are in the business of people development, of uplifting others. And that's one of the reasons why I was drawn so deeply to you, to your message, to what you speak to in Radical Humility. And we're going to talk certainly on key insights from the book, but I would love it if you could share with us, which you do touch on in the book, of course, and whether this is what you want to talk about or not, I would love it if you would share with all of us a memorable or a profound experience from your life that really shaped your philosophy on life. A profound experience, one of those most memorable ones.
So that's going to be a difficult moment I went through. I share in the book. That's the passing of my dad, actually. So my dad died with assisted suicide, which is legal in Switzerland. And going through that process with my dad, it happened in 2010. Supporting him on this path of, we're going very deep very quickly here, Jay, but I hope it's okay. Supporting him okay. on his path of truly wanting to die, that was one of the most humbling experiences of my life. So it brought up questions. What's a life worth living? Who gets to decide? How much is pain and suffering simply part of life? And so it left me with this notion that I also talk about in the book of, I will never have good answers to these big questions, but the quality of my questions improved over the process of going through this experience with my dad. And so that is, a aspect in my mind of a humble mindset, always striving to ask bigger, better, more difficult questions. And so that is certainly a defining moment in not only my life, but my whole family's life. There's no question about it. I've got two sisters and my mom who went through this with me.
So you talk about this, as you mentioned, in the book, and your father is sprinkled throughout this book. And you mentioned, matter of fact, you dedicate the book not only to your two sons, but to your father. And when you talk about your father, you mentioned that he was one of the most humble leaders who you've ever met. And clearly, many of the insights and lessons that you share throughout the book are lessons that were examples, let's say, that you took away from your father. What was it about your dad that, as you think back, what was it about him that made him so monumental in terms of humility and humble leadership? Just give a couple examples.
Absolutely. So, one little story I share in the book is when I was a young boy, I was participating in the Scouts, and my parents were very tough. You want to do the Scouts, you ride your bike, no shuttling backwards and forwards. And so I remember coming back from a scouting weekend, and I was about 12 years old, and the bike full of camping gear, super heavy, pushing it uphill, and my dad rides his bike towards me, and to my big surprise. And so he, his way of showing me that he cares about me, that he loves me, is, even though he didn't drive me, is to ride his bike and meet me halfway, right? And so he asked me a lot of questions about the weekend. He genuinely wanted to know what my weekend was like, and then delivered really tough feedback. He asked me, Urs, you forgot the most important item on the packing list. Do you know what it is? And I had no clue. And he said, well, you forgot your first aid kit. And then he actually said, weak, very weak. And so, it was his way of showing me that he loved me, that he cared for me, riding his bike, meet me, genuinely asking, about my weekend, and then delivered the hard feedback. So I'm coming back to this tough on results, 10 drum people. He was also notoriously overscheduled. I mean, he was by his own admission, a bit of a workaholic. But when people needed him, not just family members, but friends, colleagues, and wanted to talk to him, wanted to bounce something off that was important, he would always make time. So and he was an amazing listener. He really was. So he, I talk about, of course, the skill of active listening in the book. He really listened with the intent of understanding what, I was saying, my point of view, versus to respond or judge. And so, these were, and yeah, there's a couple of examples. He shaped, he also was an uber athlete and certainly influenced my own athletic endeavors, and my sister's, who actually is much more successful than I ever was in terms of athleticism, with his example.
Incredible. By the way, as I was reading about your dad, I decided to wear this shirt today in terms of listening, active listening, and really thinking about the types of questions that we ask. Because to your point that you made just a couple of moments ago, the quality of the questions that we ask can certainly influence the quality of our lives, the quality of our leadership, and how we show up for relationships across the board, personally and professionally. So I thank you for sharing those two examples with us. So we've touched on some lessons that you learned from your dad and how meaningful he was. How about your mother? What were some key lessons that you took away from your mother in your formative years, let's say, that you still carry with you today?
That's a great question, Jay. My mom was a bit of a rebel, or still is. So I grew up in Switzerland. She grew up in a very well-off, old Zurich family. So, very traditional. And she wanted out. And she did. She married my dad, and, she still has good relationships with her family. But throughout her life, she, was at times rebellious against her own family, sometimes against my dad's business career, frankly. And she was unapologetic about her needs and voiced those as well. And so I think that is one thing that, and I have a very strong relationship still with my mom. She's 83. I visit her 4 times a year in Switzerland. We spend time together. Our regular routine is to have breakfast together and chat at length. And then we do our own thing, and then maybe we have dinner again together. So her ability to stand up for what was important to her and not apologize for it. So I think that is one thing that I took away and continue to take away from my mom. And we even talk about that, actually, how it was difficult for her to, step out of her family of origin, so to speak, into her own identity.
Interesting. So based on that lesson learned, I just want to tug on that thread for just a moment. So give us maybe an example from your life of what is the most rebellious thing that you've done, or a situation where you've had to stand up for what's important to you, maybe in the face of opposing opinions or perspectives?
So I think, moving around the world numerous times and establishing myself in new environments, I'm not sure how rebellious that really was, but that's a lot of effort, as those of us who've done that know. And but I really I always try to assess my career like every 3 to 5 years, much like my dad taught me. And then my dad did that very well, and I'm really trying to live up to his example. And then, stop stop activities when they still are going well, before it's sort of, going downhill, and start something new. And that often means, I've quit jobs, I've quit my academic career. I talk about one situation in the book where I had to tell my professor, I was doing my PhD in geography, that I'm going to move to Australia. And I was deeply worried about disappointing him. He was or continues to be an amazing mentor, actually. And so, because I really try to follow my heart, so to speak, in terms of my career aspirations, it often means that I have to, say no and potentially disappoint people, because I'm going to stop something and start something new. I'm not sure there is one particular situation, but it's sort of an ongoing theme. For example, when I deployed on my peacekeeping missions, I had an executive coaching business. And so, you can imagine, take a year off. You're in the Middle East for a year. So how do you communicate that to your clients, right? So it was not a no-brainer. And, I did all the right things, of course, referred them out and, said I'll be back in a year. But still, it meant I had to sort of, say no and stop stuff and potentially disappoint some people.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And, you said something that I think is really interesting, and that is around assessing your career every 3 to 4 years, let's say. So when was the last time that you did a career assessment?
Well, when I was deployed on my second mission 2 years ago for the UN in the Middle East, where apparently I did not do a very good job, considering what's going on right now. But that's just an aside. I've been coaching for the previous, almost 20 years. And I decided that I'm going to, basically stop coaching and only focus when I come back on keynote speaking. And so that was the last time I did that. And, my time frame going forward, I will always coach some. I always think of myself as a coach. I spoke at the Coaching Federation meeting last year, and these are my people. Coaches are my people. But I have 2 more years in Seattle until my younger son graduates from high school. And I might have another mission in me. So I'm going to give it my all out for the next 2 years for keynote speaking, and obviously just wrote a book. And then I might have another mission, and that would be another, time out, another break. And so that's, I really try hard to continue doing that, as long as, health and everything else allows that.
So that desire to do another mission, that pull to do that, you mentioned at the very beginning of the conversation about serving people, right? And really trying to make a difference. When you think about the possibility of doing another mission, what goes through your mind in a decision like that? Does it tie back to service and making change and impact? What is it for you that pulls you in that direction?
Certainly, Jay, I know it sounds grandiose, but I don't overestimate my impact. I know I'm a small, cog in the wheel, but it is coming from a place of wanting to make a real difference in the world, right? I see it as my responsibility to help move the needle a little bit, seeing the privileged position I'm in. I'm living in a free country, I can, basically live a very nice life. So certainly that, but also I want to be very clear, Jay, we all, even when we're doing charitable work, it's selfish, right? Let's be honest, right? Because it makes me feel good. It makes me feel purposeful. That's great. And also then, as an executive coach previously and now speaker on leadership, it's such a good experience to go back into an environment where I have, 2 bosses, a Turkish colonel, a Swiss colonel. I have a team, I have direct reports, I have a complex environment. And so living my client's world as, as a coach or advisor, I love leadership. So I love doing it myself, but also being in my client's shoes. So that is, on a personal level, so valuable. And then lastly, I do have a keen interest in conflict zones for whatever reason. So I read up on it. And so I'm, truly interested to learn what's going on the ground. I was in the Balkans in 2017, so I dug deep into the history, the conflict, why are we where we are today, and the same in the Middle East. And, as we all know, the Middle East is so complex, as is the Balkans. It comes back to the bigger questions. Even people who lived and worked there for 10 years, I only was there 1 year, they think, oh, I think I get what's going on, the main dynamics. And then something happens out of the blue, and you go like, oh my God, I had no idea. So I really still don't understand. So anyway, so the service is the first piece, the leadership challenge, the second, and the third is truly just an interest in the current affairs in these conflict regions. And then lastly, one last thing, Jay. So, I have this background, as you said in the intro, as an ultra-endurance competitor. So, I can't officially say a sense of adventure because they don't like to hear that. They don't want people who like Rambo-style guys, right? That's
right.
But absolutely, there is a sense of adventure. Take me out of my bubble where I live, for better or worse, in Seattle, out of my nice neighborhood, and drop me somewhere, totally different. And then, Urs, you got to make it work. And I love that challenge. I love that adventure.
That's amazing. So since you brought this up, and I had mentioned this at the intro, and this becomes certainly a big part of your story, a big part of the lessons that you instill in Radical Humility, and that's around this incredible experience that you had during this endurance race. Speak to mostly what I'd love to hear from you is when you had gone through that experience, this near-death experience, you picked yourself up and you continued to move forward. And I'd love for you to speak to that mindset, what you learned about yourself through that experience, and how those lessons apply to radical humility. It's amazing. Yeah. It's an amazing story.
Well, it is an amazing story now. It was very, as you obviously know because you read the book, very unpleasant at the time. So I was hospitalized with pulmonary edema, which is fluids in your lungs. That's the stuff people die from on Everest. And my oxygen saturation, that's the thing they put on your finger during your annual physical, was 42%, and 95 to 100 is normal. So I was in ICU, I was in oxygen. And so, to sort of just set the context, and I'll answer your question specifically, I poured my life and soul into this race. I prepared for 2 years. I had 10 crew members supporting me. I've invested significant funds. And, I was living and breathing RAM, the race across America. And I wanted nothing more. I was so focused, so driven to finish this race. And then I ended up, on the fourth day in ICU. So what happened? I felt ashamed. I felt like a huge failure. I was embarrassed. I felt regret. I felt guilt for having dragged my 10 crew members along with me, who had to now, dismantle the whole, the 2 vans, and fly back from different places. And so I was flooded with these strong emotions. And it took me a long time, but eventually I got there to, come back from that. And so what really helped me there, and what I think is a key element of, as I say, fail successfully, is reframing. So reframing means going from the state where we're flooded, and we all, maybe our listeners or your listeners don't race across the country on a bike, but we all can relate to these feelings when we fail publicly in particular. Embarrassment, shame, guilt, regret, all this stuff. So then reframing helps us to move from that flooding state to coming up literally with a reframed statement. And in my case, by talking through these strong emotions and my beliefs that I let everyone down with my crew members. I did some counseling as well during that time with my family, journaling. I was able to, at the end of the day, see the race I did not finish for what it was. A bike race I did not finish. I'm a worthy person. DNF did not finish or not, and a worthy athlete. And so my reframe statement that I literally wrote out it's not here anymore now, but on my office wall, this is a valuable learning learning experience in my ultracycling career. And then I did go back and worked with high altitude experts and medical professionals on how to, better race and fuel at altitude. And so the reframe statement, that is the first one, and it ties into radical humility just briefly, because one part of being humble is having deep self-awareness, and one part of self-awareness is knowing how to deal with failures and setbacks. And so the reframing is sort of getting out of my heart into our head, right? The heart is where the strong emotions, the embarrassment, all that stuff lives, into my head, reframing. The other part is actually showing my strong emotions. Like I cried every day for, maybe a week or two. So actually letting those strong emotions out. So we all know people, when somebody who's close to them passes away, they get so busy with, organizing the memorial service and all the logistics, they never actually grieve. And so giving myself time to live these strong emotions, and I talk about about this in the book, not dwelling on them, but give it some time and space, like live through these emotions and process them. So that's the second, important mindset that I think, we can all adopt. We don't need to end up in ICU, but we can, yes, I am frustrated. I am, whatever I feel, right? So, and then the third piece is, this is a bit of a cliche, but it's true, putting myself out there again. Like we all know people who, when they're hurt in relationships, they don't commit anymore. Why? They're worried of getting hurt again. And my comeback to that is, well, the fact that I've been okay going through such a hard loss actually proves that I can do it again if I need to. So it's the reframing, it's the giving these strong emotions time and space, and then putting myself out there again. And, I can tell you, Jay, the first ultra race after that experience, I would weigh myself every 6 hours to make sure I wouldn't, retain fluid, had no fluid retentions. I was actually really, really concerned that something like that would happen again. But I said I'm going to try and commit, and obviously if something goes wrong, I'm going to stop. But I was intentionally putting myself out there again. So that was important.
This is so good. And, reframing, to your point, it is so important. I know that all of you that are watching and listening right now, we can all relate to a situation in our lives and business where there's been some sort of failure, we've fallen down, and sometimes it can be very difficult to recover from that. But I love the aspect of reframing, and I know from a personal perspective, there have certainly been a multitude of times that I have failed. One that I'm thinking of in particular that was a pretty big one. And had I had your book, then I would have been able to recover from that situation much more quickly. And I remember when I went through that, I was stuck in that storyline of the failure that occurred is you. You're a failure, not the situation, but me. And really, it took a lot of deep work to recover from that and to work through it. But you said this perfectly. If we can reframe that story, feel the emotions, which are important to feel. And again, just to give an example, I will tell you that internally, I was, of course, beating myself up, but I also pushed those emotions down because I did not want anyone else to see what was happening to me, right? Because I was concerned that other people would judge me based on the way that I was feeling. So you bring up some very, very strong points there, and I appreciate you sharing that with us. And to all of you, we are certainly talking about, we are just now scratching the surface, but we're talking about Urs's new book, Radical Humility, which I love the title, Be a Badass Leader, or the subtitle, Be a Badass Leader and a Good Human. And, I said during the intro that is a bit of a dichotomy. So talk about that, if you will, and give us Let's start with what radical humility means to you. What is it? And then we're going to talk about being a badass leader and a good human.
That's right. So the way I define radical humility is a three-legged stool. So we talked about self-awareness, right? So it's deep self-awareness. And when people ask about humility or are asked about humility, that's what often comes up, right? I see myself in line with how others see me. I see myself accurately. And so there is the self-awareness in terms of I have an accurate perception of myself. There is the notion within the self-awareness of having the humility to know that I can not achieve everything, but I can achieve almost anything I put my heart and soul into. So the notion of focus, stop doing lists and various other tools I talk about in the book. And so then the failing successfully. So that's the first leg is the self-awareness. And then the second leg is this notion of leading relationally versus simply by content expertise. And so that gets into the, be a badass leader and a good human. So, in a nutshell, building collaborative relationships with our team members and seeing them as whole human beings versus just, wheels that, or cogs in the wheel that get stuff done for us. And then the third piece is the growth mindset. We sort of touched on that a little bit. So seeing mistakes and failures as an opportunity for learning and growing versus remaining in that state, as you also pointed out, of feeling ashamed or feeling embarrassed and actually learning from them. And just on that, I want to add, as humans, we're deeply loss averse. People talk about, you got to love failing and fail fast, fail often. I call BS on that a little bit. Like nobody wants to fail. Even what we call the intelligent failures, the good failures, because we learn something, we still don't feel good about them. And so then, and that's fine. The question then exactly is, am I able to reframe from those strong emotions and learn from them? So self-awareness, leading relationally, and both on an individual level and organizationally, meaning building a strong culture, a culture of psychological safety, which I talk about in the book, and then undergirding everything is the growth mindset.
Love it. That is so good. And it's interesting. I had a conversation with a guest recently, and this particular individual works with high-performing athletes and some very well-known ones, executives and so forth, on performance and mindfulness. And it was really interesting to hear how, exactly to your point, how top performers, the way that they reframe failure, so they don't look at it as, oh my gosh, that was the worst thing that happened, right? It's they reframe it to use it to their advantage. Most importantly, what did I learn from this? And then making the subtle adjustments that are necessary to then move to the next level. And it speaks to what you have stated here already. So this is great. So I want to talk about the 5 shifts that you really talk about in detail and become the framework of the book itself. And the process that you take us through, which I absolutely love, is you talk about going from then to now leadership. And for those that may not immediately get that, tell us the difference between then and now leadership, and let's walk through the 5 shifts that can help us as leaders elevate our leadership. And then I'm going to ask you some questions about each one.
Absolutely. So, then leadership is what we used to do back then, and it worked. Top down, command control. I'm simplifying this big time. Top down, command control. The leader sits on top of the org chart, has all the data, all the information, makes all the calls, him or herself, sort of old style industrial kind of leadership. And so that's then, and now simply is humble leadership. So now equals leading with radical humility. And I make that contrast because I really feel that, and I hope, a decent argument in the book, that humble leadership is not something we do because we want to be nice or because we want to be liked. It's certainly the right thing to do by our people, to get to know them, to value them, to provide psychological safety. But my argument is we actually need it to win today. In today's complex, fast-moving business environment, the top-down command control leadership simply doesn't cut it for a variety of reasons, one of which is it's too slow. By the time the information goes up the org chart and comes down to the front lines, it's already an iteration or two behind. So that's the then to now. So the 5 shifts, just at the very, very high level. The first one is digging deep. So that's a self-awareness. I think we talked about that quite at length a little bit. So this is really moving from blind spots. Blind spots are those things everybody else knows about you, but you have no clue. So moving from blind spots, reducing them to self-awareness. The second one is tough on results and tender on people. And, I shared how my dad lived that. So this is telling your people, actually, like I personally experienced during my service in Kosovo, my commanding officer opening a meeting with me with these words: "I love you, Urs, you know I do, and this is not even close to being good enough." His words made me shrink in my chair, and I turned myself inside out for the next 9 months to only deliver the best work. If he would have yelled at me, if he would have belittled me, I would have just tuned him out. It's just another blah, 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 whatever. And the message would have not landed. But because I knew he cared for me, he really wanted me to succeed, that's why I really was able to hear his feedback. So that I love you and your work is not good enough. I use that quite frequently with clients as well. And so that's a second shift. The third shift is lead like a compass. And so this is about delegating as much as possible. And I know there's a lot of buzzwords here, and delegation is not sexy on you, I get it. And yet so many of us still struggle with that. It's about pushing decision making as far down into the organization as possible. I talk extensively about the turnaround CEO of Best Buy, Hubert Joly, who basically, I can talk more about that, but he basically said, when I felt I've lost control of the operation because I delegated so comprehensively, that's when performance skyrocketed. So the notion of empowering my people at the front lines and, having the humility to step out of the spotlight and let my team members shine. In that shift, I often challenge my clients also to make yourself obsolete, work yourself out of a job. The true test of leadership, Jay, is how the ship runs when you're not there. So anyway, so that's the third one. The fourth one is full transparency. So this is about, sharing much more than we naturally do about our decision making, our thought processes, encouraging open and difficult and honest discussions so that the best idea wins, not just my idea, right? So that's transparency around my thought process, my decision making as a leader, but that also is where I share with transparency and with vulnerability my shortcomings as a leader. And and I can go on and on about this, but vulnerability is the quickest way to build trust. Appropriate vulnerability. Brené Brown says vulnerability is the last thing I want to show you, and it's the first thing I'm looking for in you, right? So it's this, and I have a fascinating study, if I may quickly on that, because I feel very passionate about this.
Please.
A study in the book where pairs of complete strangers are brought into a lab, and for 45 minutes, they're tasked with asking and responding to meaningful questions, such as, what does love and friendship mean to you? Or, if you only had 1 year to live, what would you change? At the end of 45 minutes, these complete strangers were asked to rate the level of trust they had developed with their partner 45 minutes. participants rated the level of trust about as high as the average level of trust they have with people in their lives. Some even rated it as high as the trust they have with their significant other, which probably says more about the marriage then. But anyway, that's a side note, exactly side note. And one parent, I love this, even got married. But the point, think about this, 45 minutes. So the research is crystal clear. One of the quickest ways to build trust is to show up with the appropriate, we can talk more about what that means, appropriate vulnerability. So that's the fourth shift. And the fifth shift is champion a fearless culture. So this is, how do I develop a psychologically safe culture? The research is crystal clear across all industries, and every single study that's ever been done. Google was the first one who published it, that a psychologically safe culture is the best predictor of a team's performance. It's better than who's on the team, the size, the tenure, if it's virtual or in person. So that's the fifth shift, champion a fearless culture.
All right. So 5 shifts. And I just want to add this for those who have not already seen Radical Humility, or maybe don't have a copy yet, which I will ask you right now to run, don't walk, to pick up a copy of this book. If you are, and quite frankly, I was going to say, if you're in any type of leadership book, this is a must read. Quite frankly, this is a read for everyone, because not only does it apply in a business setting for leaders, right? But it also applies in all areas of life. I mean, there's so much in this book that is applicable and that applies everywhere. So do make a point to go out and get it. But what I wanted to share was the way, Urs, that you break down each of the 5 steps and then give actionable items, right? Actionable steps to take, things that we can do to really begin to engage and use this information. And you provide, obviously, a QR code with each chapter as well, which takes you to additional resources. It really is a working model, right? It's a framework, but the whole intent here is to encourage you not just to read and not just to learn, but to actually apply, right? Take those lessons and implement them in your business, in your life. And so let's start with shift number 1, going deep. The one thing that I noted, and there's a lot to this, but the one thing I'd like you to speak to is the ability to ask your team members for feedback on your own performance as a leader. And I bring this up because it's so timely. I've got a coaching client that I just had a conversation about this very topic a few days ago. So speak to that. And also, do you recommend 360 assessments or some other tool? What would you suggest, and how can we get better about asking for feedback on our own performance?
Right. So I'm a fan of 360s. I mean, if you're in an organization and there's a 360, so certainly take advantage of that. That's for those of us who've done it, we know it's a slightly terrifying exercise when you anonymously get feedback on. 360, by the way, means 360, so peers, directs, and bosses. And so certainly I'm a fan of 360 tools. But aside from, even if you don't have that, and obviously many entrepreneurs, we don't deploy 360s per se, getting into the habit at the end of every one-on-one, which, by the way, that's another thing I feel very strongly about, like regular one-on-one meetings with my direct reports. The research shows it's about every 10 minutes that we should do that, every 10 days, I'm sorry. So the weekly rhythm actually works well. At the end of every one-on-one, ask for, hey, Jay, what do I do well as your boss? What can I do better? As simple as that. And get into the habit of doing these 2 questions. Get into the habit of doing this regularly so it doesn't become this scary one-off thing we do once a year and we're all worried about what's coming back. And so, I certainly can improve many things in my leadership, but that's one of the things I actually really implemented in all the positions I've ever held, regularly ask for feedback. And the good thing about it is you catch small things before they become big things. I remember I was deployed in Kosovo, and as an old officer, I would drop my sidearm just on the desk and started to work on my computer. And then I asked for feedback from my officers during a one-on-one, and he said, Urs, that's what in the old days. These days, the sidearm has to be either on your body or locked up. It's a small thing, but, it was easy for me to fix. So get into the habit of regularly asking for what do I do well, what can I do better? As simply as that.
Love it. That's perfect. All right, let's go to shift number 2, which is tough on results and tender on people. Now, we've been talking a bit about this throughout the conversation. I would just share with you that all of these shifts are important. This particular one is very meaningful to me. And you give such great wealth of information on each of these, but I just absolutely love this. So again, talking about feedback, but this time let's talk about how we as leaders can improve on delivering tough feedback to others. And you gave an example in the book, and you shared an example here in our conversation. Maybe take another example of maybe a client relationship that you have, without naming names, of course, but addressing how we can get better at delivering tough feedback.
So I think I will actually take a step back. So it's much easier to deliver tough feedback when we've actually been tender on people, when we've built a relationship. So, I often say that, it's tough on result, tender on people. So being tender on people, getting to know my people on a meaningful personal level, then actually gives me license to be tough on results. And so, and by the way, as I shared with my commander in Kosovo, my feedback is much more likely to be heard and acted upon by my team members if they know that I care for them on a personal level, if I've gotten to know them, right? And so I think that's actually an important first step we have to take. In terms of delivering tough feedback, I mean, we often talk about using I language, right? So if it's a personal relationship, maybe less in a business setting, nobody can argue with my feelings. So when I say, I'm disappointed, Jay, or that made me feel blah, 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 like you can't argue with that, right? So because that's, so I would focus on I language, how it landed with me, how it came across for me. And then, that's probably very obvious, but stay away from accusatory language and focus on I, and then the facts, like whatever happened. And so those are the couple of things that come up for me.
Very good. I appreciate that. All right, let's go to shift number 3, which is lead like a compass. So this is personally, this is a difficult one for me. I'm getting better, but I'm a work in progress, and it is really about letting go and delegating. And the interesting and that's just one piece of it, right? But what's interesting about this is, and I had mentioned this at the opening as well, one of the things that I work on with my coaching clients is creating more freedom in their lives and in their businesses. We do that through better time management, through delegating, and a number of other things. But here, I'm the coach, and I have a difficult time letting go of things. I just truly do. So I can appreciate how challenging that can be, and really being less involved in the day-to-day. Because when we think that we have to do it all, right, it kind of goes to that saying, if everything's important, nothing's important. And if you truly want to grow your business, grow a sustainable, thriving business, you have to learn how to set boundaries and how to delegate. So share a little bit about shift number 3, lead like a compass, maybe an example of what we can do to get better at delegating.
So, this is all this stuff, as you and I know, it's very simple, but it's not easy, right? It's simple concepts. But it's not. So, everything that comes across my desk, I ask myself, who else could do this? Every decision that needs to be made, who else can make this decision? So just applying that frame of mind, who else could? And as we often in the military talk, when we're in a crisis in the tactical operations center, the commander cannot have a job. You can't have a task, because otherwise you get lost in the weeds and you lose sight of the big picture. So you need to work yourself literally out of a job so you can make sure everybody else can do theirs. And so, one other very tactical thing I like to advise my clients to do is use the 4D framework, right? It's delegate, who else can do it? Dump, simply don't do it. And then, diarize, as in like putting it into a diary, or, 4 months out, I don't have to think about it until then. And then lastly, the do, which is what can only you do. So these are some, simple frameworks. And coming back to the previous shift, it's all about engaging my people in these conversations as well. So in a one-on-one, like, what else do you want to take on? Like, where do you want to grow? And what can you then sort of collaborate on and offload off your plate so they can grow and learn and get better while you free yourself up?
Brilliant. And I love that one question, that one simple question, that if we can all ask ourselves that, the who else can do this? I mean, if we could do that, that could help out tremendously in and of itself. So let's go to full transparency. This one's huge. And when I started my corporate career, I started off in one of those command and control type organizations, big organization, and there was no transparency.
Right.
And in the lack of transparency, we'll make up stories, right? So let's talk about transparency. You brought up Brene Brown and talking about vulnerability. This can be difficult for people who aren't used to sharing of themselves and really being both vulnerable and transparent with information. So what's a good starting point there for us?
Absolutely. So I think on the transparency around, what's going on in the business, it's realizing that we always overestimate how much of what we say actually as a leader actually is heard and lands. And so I challenge my clients 150 times, 7 different ways. So you need to bring the same message 150 times, 7 different ways. And only when you hear them paraphrase your message, and that's, by the way, why you can't have 10 things you talk about. Have 3, right? 3 things, 3 priorities. And I would, in my peacekeeping mission, I had 2 goals, overarching goals. And I would bring the 2 goals up every single day for 10 seconds at the beginning of every briefing. So you can't over communicate. In terms of the vulnerability piece, this is a big topic. I totally get that this is very uncomfortable for a lot of us. And yet, again, the research is crystal clear. So what's one simple thing we can do? Simply sharing a meaningful personal goal with our team members. So I'm working on becoming better at XYZ. Like, that is a bit of vulnerability. It shows that I'm also work in progress. I, as your leader, am also, trying to get better. And so sharing what I'm working on, what I can do better, and how I'm going about it. And by the way, you set an excellent example, because then your directs go, oh, the boss is doing personal development. Maybe I should too, right? And so that is a non-threatening, not that scary way to display some vulnerability while showing that you deploy a growth mindset as well.
I love that. And then the 5th shift is champion a fearless culture. And the note that I made to myself on this one was around our team members really becoming more comfortable with pushing back on our own ideas and the decisions that we're making. I mean, this can be very, very difficult depending on the culture that's been built, right? So if you're in a situation where the people that are surrounding you are just shaking their head, they just become yes people and they're not really pushing back and challenging ideas, we miss huge opportunities to grow and to learn, to iterate, to become better. So give us maybe and that's just one part of a fearless culture, but maybe give us an example of how we can get started there. What's a good first step we can all take?
So this is, literally talking about what you just mentioned in a team meeting. So making it clear that you encourage everybody to speak up and that you want to hear everyone's voice. And we all have those team members, by the way, who love to take up airtime. So I'm not, those you don't need to encourage, but there is plenty of people who, sometimes the most thoughtful ones are the ones who speak up least. So, explicitly inviting everybody's feedback, including calling on people. So I think that's, this is a psychological safety, fearless culture is a big, big topic. And so there's many components to it. But simply talking about what sort of culture do we want to have in our team and making that part of an agenda item during a team meeting. And by the way, lead by example. When people speak up, your first response is always, thank you for bringing this up, even if you disagree. Because if you're dismissive, if you go like, come not again, you can be sure next time nobody will speak up. But I also want to be very clear. We live in the real world. So there is a difference between everybody speaking up when we're still making decisions. And by the way, being clear about how the decision is made is also important. Don't give people the illusion that they have input into the decision when you already have made a decision. That's a whole separate conversation, but you and I know about that well, unfortunately. But there is also a time where we've made this decision and we will not debate it now for 2 months until we see how it's playing out. Like, don't constantly second guess. That's not psychological safety. So psychological safety is it's safe for people to speak up about their questions, concerns, doubts without fear of being shamed or, worse, risking their career. But, not every decision needs to be up for debate every single time. So this is why leadership is a thinking person sport, right? It's it's always context dependent.
Absolutely. So thank you for sharing each of those different examples. And my friends, I know you're getting a tremendous amount of value out of this conversation. And I say this a lot on this podcast. You see me taking a lot of notes, right? I take notes. Yes, I can go back and I can re-listen to this podcast. There's no question about it. But there is something magical about taking notes, writing things down, committing them to memory, and just asking yourself questions about the information that you're hearing. How can I apply this? And quite frankly, we have only scratched the surface on what's all the incredible information that's available in Radical Humility. Of course, we're going to provide a link to where you can purchase a copy of it. I also want to mention, as we're wrapping up our conversation, Urs, that you have a great assessment available on your website as well. It is a Radical Humility assessment. I took it, and I've got my results right here. And I really appreciated the way that you structured the questions and then also the report that you provide that is really helpful in looking at each of these different shifts, including growth mindset that you mentioned. And then you get an overall score, and you can see on basically a 4-piece path, if you will, where your score falls. And then how we can use the book as a tool to help us improve and continue to grow and apply the lessons of radical humility in our leadership and in our life. So well done on that. Thank you for sharing that assessment with all of us. We'll provide a link to that too. So as we're wrapping up our conversation, Urs, I would love it if you would give all of us, including me, a challenge. What is one thing that you would challenge us to do starting immediately?
A challenge. Just ask. Just ask your teammates for how you can do better. Just ask your teammates about what's going on in their lives, what's going on outside of work, of course, appropriate questions. Get to know them on a meaningful personal level. Just ask and then zip it and listen.
Love that one. Such a great challenge. So, Urs, here is my final question to you. What is one of the most difficult decisions that you've had to make in the pursuit of the person who you are today? One of the most difficult decisions you've had to make.
One of the most difficult decisions I've had to make was actually going on my missions while having teenage boys at home and being a divorced dad. So that was very difficult.
Thank you for sharing that. Urs, I want to thank you so very much for joining us today on Business Minds Coffee Chat. I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. You have been so insightful. I appreciate your transparency. I appreciate your humility. I appreciate the fact that you brought this incredible book to life for all of us to be able to learn from. And I'm just grateful for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jay, for having me. I had a lot of fun, and I love what you're doing with your community. So thank you.
Absolutely. It is my pleasure. And for all of you, thank you so very much for watching and for listening. And I do have a quick favor. Would you please take just a moment to rate and leave a comment about this particular episode? Let us know one or two things that you took away that you're going to apply in your life and in your leadership from this episode with Urs. I would appreciate that. If you could do that on Apple Podcasts, that would be wonderful. That helps us expand our reach and be able to attract incredible guests just like Urs. And to be able to listen to more podcasts, all you need to do is visit jscherbusinessconsulting.com, click that podcast button, and until next time, keep learning, keep growing. Make sure you run to pick up a copy of Radical Humility, and we'll see you on the next Business Minds Coffee Chat. Take care, everybody.